Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this episode, we'll be reviewing Edgar Wright's stylish new thriller, Baby Driver, looking back at the 10th series of Doctor Who, and checking back in with Curse Words, a new comic by Charles Soule and Ryan Brown. We'll also be finding out what Nick thought of Apoptygma Berzerk's gothy synth-pop album You and Me Against the World later in the show. But before all of that, I'd just like to take a moment to say this episode is dedicated to the memory of Barry Norman, a film critic who did the BBC's film show, the show that's kind of film 2015, film 2016, film 2017. He was the host before Jonathan Ross. Yeah, a very long-standing film critic, with a very illustrious career, reviewing lots of films, who sadly passed away recently. He was a real inspiration to me. His film review show was one of the things that first sort of got me watching films and got me interested. When I was first really getting into films, he sort of really helped me find my way, and it was a bit of an inspiration. I read his book, And Why Not? Really interesting memoir of a life as a film critic. I'd recommend reading it if you're interested in journalism, the media, film reviewing. And I don't think I'd be doing this podcast now, without the inspiration of Barry Norman. So rest in peace. You'll be missed. Right, now we've done that. Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I remember reading Barry Norman's film reviews in the Radio Times. They were always good. Anyway, the climax of a long-running saga on this podcast, I read the third and final volume of Alan Moore's Jerusalem. In fact, I finished it literally just after we recorded the last podcast, so it's been a few weeks now, but yes, I have finished it. The entire 3-book novel/trilogy. It's been an epic experience, including me losing the second volume somewhere in East London on a night out. If anyone's got it, then please do let us know at MFV Podcast on Twitter. I would like it back, because that thing only comes in a 3-book box set, and getting hold of just one of them is a gigantic pain in the arse. But anyway, back to more nuanced critical thinking. Yeah, book 3 was pretty good. Unfortunately, it was probably the lesser of the 3 books. The level of meandering got a bit much. Some of the chapters didn't quite work for me, but the last few chapters, actually wrapping the whole thing up, were really good, and he did do a surprisingly good job of actually bringing the whole thing together. I must admit, spreading it out as much as I did, in order to stop it seemed like too much of a slog, I went away and read other books between volumes of Jerusalem, which was good for my sanity, but perhaps sometimes bad for remembering exactly who every single character in the quite large cast spread across history that he's built up over the course of these 3 books actually is. But nonetheless, I'm glad I read it. It was a sort of suitably epic feeling event that I've been through over the last few months.
So which of the 3 volumes do you think was the best?
The second one, the one that I lost on a bus. The second one is the best by far. It's the one that's a sort of self-contained novel within the novel, if you know what I mean. It's the one that has a sort of a story within itself. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe that makes me a simpleton, because I needed the self-contained actual story, whereas the other 2 are basically standalone, broadly connected chapters. Then there's a sort of inevitable inconsistency. Some of the chapters are brilliant, others are slightly weird. There's a chapter that's written in the style of Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, which I've never read, full disclosure. I'm not pretending to have read Finnegan's Wake, or I think anything else by James Joyce, but whatever that means, it's really hard going. That is very long as well. If I was writing this book, which I never will, and I wanted to do a chapter in a very difficult, slightly out of date language, I probably would not make it about 40 pages of very small text long. It did take me about 3 weeks to get through that one very long chapter, which may perhaps be one of the main reasons I'm slightly down on book 3 as a whole, but nonetheless, it was fine in the end. So book 2 is definitely the best. Book 2 actually almost so standalone you could read it without the other parts, although you would miss some of the resonance.
Oh, great. So, and it does tie itself together, I guess, unite its themes and wrap itself up nicely at the end? I mean, you'd want some kind of payoff after reading 600,000 words, however long it is.
There's a broad, overarching story involving an artist who appears to be basically a gender-flipped version of Alan Moore himself, putting on a show in which each item at her show is one of the chapters from the book. And it sort of ends with a chapter of her brother going around this exhibition and commenting on each item, which is a bit meta, to be honest, because it's basically a man reading the book. To the extent that he even goes out for breaks at the exact point in the progression where each of the books take a break, if you know what I mean. And there's a bit where he first gets to the exhibition, and there's a model of the area of Northampton that the whole book is sort of about. Basically, his description of it, it's identical to the map that's at the start of the book. It was a sort of the bit that tied it all together, I guess, and that bit and the 2 or 3 chapters before it were quite fun. It wasn't quite as depressing an ending as some of the previous chapters, and to be honest, my prior experience with Alan Moore's work. had led me to expect. I'll give him that. Maybe he's bellowing in his old age. Some characters did get quite depressing endings.
So would you recommend this book to readers or to people? Is it one for big fans of Alan Moore?
I don't know. I'm beyond my sort of vague interest in him as a major comic writer, I'm not a massive Alan Moore person. I've probably read more Alan Moore this year. Well, certainly because I've read 600,000 words of it than I have at any previous point in my life. As I think I've said before, if you like big, sprawling, slightly literary aspiring fantasy novels, or possibly literary novels with fantasy elements, or David Mitchell books, if you're a massive fan of David Mitchell, then you might enjoy Jerusalem. It's attempting to be entirely objectively critical about it. I think the prose is sometimes a bit rambly, like sometimes, I'm not sure we need quite as many incredibly long descriptions of Northampton. And whether you're into it kind of depends on how much you're liking this particular chapter, or possibly what mood you're in at the time, or whether it's written in the style of Finnegan's Wake. But yeah, again, if you like your sort of rambling literary fantasy David Mitchell novels, then it might be worth at least giving it a go. But I perhaps would recommend spreading it out a bit to avoid it driving you insane.
Right, interesting.
But yeah, there we go. That was Jerusalem by Alan Moore, and that is the third and maybe last time you'll hear me talk about it on this podcast. It's been a mini adventure within this recommendation section, and now it's over.
That concludes the Odyssey.
Yep, God knows what I'll do next week.
You could read Finnegan's Wake?
Maybe that could be my epic literary odyssey next year.
I refuse to believe anyone's actually read Finnegan's Wake and gets it. It's one of those books I think people claims to have read, because it's utterly impenetrable.
I've heard rumours of people being made to read Ulysses by James Joyce as part of, English degrees and finding it suitably punishing, but no, I'm not sure I've heard of anyone having read Finnegan's Wake. Anyway, that, at long last, was that. Alistair, what have you been doing?
Well, I've been reading some comics recently. Yes, Nick, your influence is working its magic on me. I've been reading some of the Rivers of London comics. Dedicated fans will remember that last year we reviewed the most recent of Ben Aranovic's Rivers of London novels, called The Hanging Tree. So now Aranovich is working with some comic writers to bring out comics set in the Rivers of London world, which is described as CSI meets Harry Potter. It's about PC Peter Grant, the new guy in the Met's division that looks into magical crime. So as well as novels and I think novellas and short stories, there are now comics in the universe. So I've been reading Rivers of London Volume 2, Night Witch, and that's by Ben Aranovich, Andrew Cartmel and Lee Sullivan. In this one, Peter Grant and his boss stroke mentor Nightingale are brought in to deal with a Russian oligarch's daughter who's been kidnapped. They get involved with the Russian mafia, monstrous forest creatures, and of course the big villain, the Faceless Man. It's a really good story. It's got all the elements you'd want from the Peter Grant novels. It's got Peter Grant's witty internal monologue. This one done in sort of little yellow text boxes in the corner of the screen. It's got interesting bits about police procedure. It's got a great sort of thriller plot line. There's twists and turns. It kind of fills out the world a bit more as well, as each Rivers of London novel does, adds a little bit more to the whole world. So does this one. Yeah, it's very good. I'm enjoying it. Strange thing that after listening to the audiobooks for all of the other Rivers of London novels, now when I read the comic, I can't help but hear the characters in my head talk in the same voices they do in the audiobook. So I've got Copner Holbrook Smith's voice in my head as I read the comic, which is not necessarily a bad thing. He's a great reader. Yeah,
I've read the first one of these, I think Bodywork, the first volume, which Alistair lent me. And yeah, they're pretty good fun. I mean, the Rivers of London universe lends itself quite well to sort of exploratory material, because it's quite a dense universe and he tends to sort of go into one area of it for one book and then sort of leave again. I did find it quite weird having the characters their appearance actually nailed down for me, for some reason. I've not really had that problem with other literary adaptations, but it seemed weird this time. With the exception of Peter Grant himself, I think. They all look slightly different to how I imagined them.
Yeah, now between hearing their voices in the audiobook and seeing them in the comic, I've kind of got a much more pinned down version of what they look like. Although there's rumours there's a TV series coming at some point, so I guess that's going to, again, pin it down further.
Again, because it's such a broad universe and it's so easy to just do random stories, I can imagine a TV show working pretty well if they can get, some good actors and some good special effects money.
But no, I'd recommend these comics. If you're a fan of supernatural or crime stories and you like comics, I'd recommend reading them. And obviously, if you're a big fan of the Rivers of London novels, which I am, they're probably, the book series, and I'm into the most at the moment. And I'm eagerly awaiting the release of the new novella, which is in September this year.
Okay, and now we're going to talk about Baby Driver, the new film from Edgar Wright. It's a sort of crime musical about a young driver called Baby with a slightly odd demeanour and a habit of listening to music all the time, who gets mixed up in a series of robberies because as well as listening to music a lot, he's also amazing at driving, and of course gets pulled in for one last job just as he finally meets the girl he loves, and in true sort of romantic American crime film fashion, it all goes horribly wrong. So we've both seen this film. I think we've both enjoyed a few Edgar Wright films in the past, so we were quite up for this. Alistair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, overall, really enjoyed this film. Yeah, it's got the characteristic Edgar Wright, very, very slick directing, excellent camera work, really well put together action sequences. We know he can direct a good action scene from films like, Hot Fuzz, or even like Shaun of the Dead has some good chases and some good car bits in it. So yeah, very slick, very well put together, very entertaining. It's quite a long film, just under 2 hours, but really didn't feel like that. It kind of zipped along, some good performances, and a phenomenal soundtrack, like music pretty much throughout the entire film. And yeah, such a great, very, very varied soundtrack.
I really quite like this. It's perhaps not reinventing the wheel plot-wise. It's a bit sort of, I was going to say style over substance, and that sounds a bit harsh, but I think you really are kind of here for the style. You describe the plot as I sort of did earlier. It's quite standard, but you're here for sort of Edgar Wright's sort of directorial flourish and the cool soundtrack and the way the camera just sort of keeps constantly moving along to the music, and as you say, all the cool action sequences and cool car chases. For as someone we were with commented shortly after the film finished, for a film allegedly about cars, the number of high octane car chase sequences was actually quite low. There was one at the very beginning and actually not that many others.
There are some very good action scenes. Surprisingly, not as many as you might think. I suppose when they get into the final act, they want to make the confrontation more character on character. There's a few more non-vehicle based action scenes.
Yeah, I should say, it's not a film that lacks action, especially as Alistair said, in the final half hour, 45 minutes. There's a lot of action. It just tends to be shooty, gun, bang, bang action rather than drivey car action. Sorry, apparently I've seen a film called Baby Driver and now I'm just going to talk like a baby, because that's what we do.
Fair enough.
I really should remember to swear a lot when we discuss curse words. But yeah, a good film. There's a very nice sort of momentum to it. As I say, when I was talking about the style of it, it's got its sort of soundtrack and the camera's always moving along, the scene's always going. Baby, the lead character, played very nicely by Ansel Elgort, who has a very impressive name, and gives a lot of natural likability to the character. There's a bit very near to the beginning, in the first few minutes, where he's alone in his car while his mates are robbing a bank, and he just starts air singing and playing guitar and drumming and just generally air performing this song that's on his headphones in a very sort of no one's watching way, and it's just endearing. It's the sort of full character bit that, if you get the right actors to do it, which they clearly have, can just make you instinctively like a character even when he's mixed up in crime. Although always very careful, he's very much the sort of criminal with a heart of gold. He's just there because he's good at driving and he's got a sort of understanding with the lead gangster played by Kevin Spacey, although Kevin Spacey isn't above sort of manipulating him a bit, and so he's just sort of there, sort of cautiously, not really fitting in with the other criminals, just so you know that he's, a nice criminal. It's not really a film about, crime and the moral ambiguity of crime and how much can you do while still retaining your humanity. But he's a nice bloke in a sort of boppy musical film for most of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly the emotional core of the film, and I'd agree with what you would say that Ansel Elgort does a really good performance in there. I mean, he's got all the kind of leading man things, and that he's very likeable. You really kind of empathise with the character right from the beginning. Like I say, it's not doing anything breathtakingly original in terms of plot or characterization, but you've got the core stuff that you need for a film done very well. You introduce the character early on, you're made to sympathize with him, you're rooting for him. You realize he's a nice guy, even though he's committing crimes. He's going out of his way to be nice. For example, one bit when he's trying to escape, he steals a car, forces a woman to get out, realizes she's left his handbag, drives back, returns the handbag and apologizes to her before driving off. Which is a great little comic sequence, but also fills in his character very well, that he's the sort of person that, I'm only stealing this car because he really has to, and he's going to inconvenience the owner as little as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm unclear how many people like Baby actually exist in the middle of, hardened crime gangs. I don't know how many getaway drivers I'd really want to hug.
I don't know if it's particularly realistic, but he's a very engaging character, and you root for him. He's looking after his foster father, who's older and in a wheelchair. His budding relationship with a waitress he meets. I really like the way that they sort of talk about music. Music is just so integral to this film, much more so even than driving, even though it's a film, a car film about driving. The music is just so integral to this film. The character pretty much listens to music continuously, and the whole film is from their point of view. So as he listens to music, you hear it on the soundtrack. Someone I was speaking to today about the film interestingly pointed out that the soundtrack to the film is actually longer than the film itself. Because obviously there's lots of songs, and some of them it only uses a short clip from, so if you put all the songs back to back. So that goes to show how much music there is in this film, and how integral music is to the film. And I really like the scenes when Baby and his girlfriend are discussing music, and like she's called Deborah, so she's got basically 2 songs named after her, and he's called Baby, so he's got almost every song ever.
Yeah, the one sort of potentially valid criticism I've seen of this film is that the 2 female characters are quite sort of thin compared to the male ones who get to have, more complex relationships with each other. Whereas the 2 are both basically love interests, and they don't necessarily get to have deep, meaningful journeys. All the characters who get much, feel depth to them are mostly men. In fact, they're entirely men. Yeah, especially Lily James as the lead love interest, Deborah. She is very charming, and if you allow for the fact that it is a sort of a quite standard girlfriend who represents his salvation in a film about him trying to get out of crime, then yeah, she's very charming and very nice, and the parts where they're together are kind of adorable. Yeah,
they've got chemistry, and they're very good at conveying their relationship. Yeah, which is kind of, again, the emotional core of the plot of the film, which is, you're rooting for Baby to get out of this gang so he can be with his girlfriend and not have kind of constantly be looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, but it's one of these films where, after watching it for a while, you sort of, even though it's technically about a bloke who's involved in crime, because it's sort of quite fun and quite light, you could sort of let yourself vaguely forget by about the halfway mark that, it's a properly grim world where dangerous things happen, until, of course, inevitably something goes a bit wrong and the bodies start dropping. And I think that's a fairly standard beat in a lot of crime films, but this one, because it's got such a sort of jaunty musical thing going on, does have that shift particularly elegantly and hard.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of sort of entertaining time skips when one character sort of bops off to the music, and something that would take about 10-15 minutes sort of just happens instantly without a cut or anything. There's a scene where he's getting coffee and he just sort of looks up, nodding along to some music, and then looks back. It's literally been about 2 seconds and the coffee's just there. And yeah, it's a sort of a beat that's used quite effectively towards the end.
Yeah, that is very good. The kind of way it plays with time in that respect. And also, the whole thing is put together to usually a very appropriate piece of music. It's also got a lot of long tracking shots, which seem to be something of an Edgar Wright signature. I mean, I know there's quite a few long tracking shots in Shaun of the Dead. I'm pretty sure they're also in Hot Fuzz and World's End and other films. But yeah, there's definitely several sequences in Baby Driver when the camera will follow Baby for a long period of time as he walks, say, from his flat to pick up the coffee, and then to the place where he's meeting the other gangsters, and then through that scene, constantly moving in and about and around him, and kind of getting a sense of the world he inhabits, the other people who are about. It's part of the very smooth, slick way that the film is put together.
Well, yeah, and it's also sort of the energy that Ansel Elgort is projecting as Baby. A lot of the other characters spend a lot of time nudging each other and pointing at Baby and going, what's up with him? And, obviously a lot of the time they're being arseholes. You can sort of understand why he sort of gets their attention, because he has got this sort of weird, quiet intensity going on, and he's constantly ignoring them and listening to music and off in his own world, yet also always paying attention. It is it's a good performance.
Yeah.
And also, the big shots you mentioned where he's walking down the street and it just follows him for a good few minutes while he sort of bops along. That's very sort of Hollywood musical, isn't it?
Yeah, those kind of big set pieces with long tracking shots is the sort of thing you would see in a Hollywood musical, as well as again also locating the song very much at the centre of what the film's trying to do. This is a film that's very much about music. The characters, Baby and his girlfriend are constantly discussing music, and it's through music that they bond, through listening to it at a laundromat or listening to the music that Baby himself makes.
Yeah, there are a couple of bits, not too many, because it does get a bit yes, okay if it's done too much. There are a couple of bits where they put a really on-the-nose bit of music or a really on-the-nose lyric over a certain bit, and it just makes you laugh. Like when he enters the diner where Deborah works, and he's there with his criminal associate, so he's sort of keeping his head down and trying to not interact with her so they won't know that he knows her. And there's I think the lyric that plays over is something like, what's the matter with my baby? Or something like that. Which, obviously, you could do with your lead character's called Baby. As you said earlier, all the songs are about him.
Yeah, when I first heard of the film, I thought, I like the look of this, but, Baby is such a terrible name for a main character, I thought. And as soon as you start watching this, you realise that, it works perfectly with the whole music connotation that, his name's Baby, so all the songs sort of relate to him, because he's the core of this world.
Yeah, though I actually thought some of the trailers to this looked, but I don't know. I mean, I had some confidence it would be pretty good, because, again, it's an Edgar Wright film. We like Edgar Wright. But the trailers for this don't really do it justice, in my opinion. So, for the record, if you're thinking of seeing this but thought the trailers looks a bit, ho-hum, then give it a go. It is good. And it is, as we've said about a million times, very, very well shot and cinematically good. So, yeah, if you think you'd regret it if you didn't see it in a cinema, then, yeah, give it a go.
It's got a very, very individual style created through the direction by Edgar Wright, the performances and the music, and the very diverse range of music that's in it. And I think the trailer's been cut to make it look much more like a heist crime movie because, the trailer's cut for a mass audience, which is why the trailer doesn't, as you say, the trailer doesn't do it justice. But in the film itself, you get something that's much more esoteric.
Yeah, although in terms of conforming to genre or whatever, because, let's talk about conforming to genre. It is a lot more of a sort of, here's a sincere effort in the genre than, to use the obvious example, the Cornetto trilogy were, the Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, World's End trilogy. Yeah,
well, they were very much genre bending, like Shaun of the Dead, literally rom-com,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's genre bending, that's mashing together genres. Well, Hot Fuzz is a very straight-up action movie, but in a very unusual setting of the small parochial English town.
And it does wink and nod to its genre quite a lot, which this film doesn't as much.
No, yeah, you're right. This film is a much more straight-up crime film. It's just got more directorial flourishes than, I suppose, the average crime-based film like Welcome to the Punch or something like that. So that film came out 4 years ago. That's a really bad reference to an obscure film that came out 4 years ago.
I was going to say, I haven't seen that, but I'm sure it's great.
Yeah, I'm getting old.
Yes, we are. That's why we're talking about films that came out in very early 2000s, like they're, still in any way contemporary. Shaun of the Dead?
Yeah.
Shaun of the Dead? That's a film old people like, man. What have you been doing, Grandad? They're all about, I don't know, The Walking Dead now, probably. Just endless Walking Dead. Walking Dead forever. Walking Dead till we die and become zombies ourselves. Anyway, I'm getting off topic.
Yeah. We've talked about how good Ansel Elgort was in this film, but great performances from supporting cast members. John Hamm, someone I've got a lot of time for. I really liked Mad Men. And also he was good in films such as The Town. But he was very, very good in this film, playing a character of oscillating likability, who can sometimes be nice to Baby and sometimes quite cruel to him.
Yeah, John Hamm brought a bit of dimension to his character. There were some characters who were nice to Baby in a slightly weird, patronising, they probably thought he had special needs way, and some characters who were just arseholes to him, because we're meant to think they're arseholes. But the John Hamm stuff was good. And John Hamm is always good, whether in comedy or drama. John Hamm is truly the man of all trades.
The man for all seasons.
Yeah.
Also, Jamie Foxx was very good. Maybe a slightly less complex character than the John Hamm one, but really great performance from Jamie Foxx, playing the kind of completely out of control, trigger-happy member of the gang. He brings a real edge of menace to his character. It was reminiscent of Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet or Paddy Considine in A Room for Romeo Brass, a real kind of character with sort of edge that when you tensed whenever he appeared on screen.
Yeah, it was impressive, I guess, because Edgar Wright has a certain sort of kudos now. He can get these sort of interesting, beloved actors to play these sort of, I don't know, not exactly small or supporting roles, but comparatively, obviously not the main character roles, like John Hamm and Jamie Foxx. I don't know, maybe I'm overestimating them because I like them in other things, but they're the sort of people I sort of think would be headlining movies.
They can certainly open a film just under the weight of their own star power. Jamie Foxx, definitely. I mean, he starred in, films like Collateral. That's a great film. He did that Ray Charles biopic. These films also came out about 10 years ago. What's it with the old school references today?
Because there's nothing except superhero films anymore, but you're right, Collateral is great.
Yeah. Well, Jamie Foxx was in Amazing Spider-Man 2, Django Unchained.
Yes, a good recent film at last. Well done, everyone.
He was very good in that. Yeah.
Made by another quirky filmmaker who attracts actors to do strong, silly performances. But yeah, this was good. I suspect in my internal Edgar Wright rankings, which of course I have because I'm a nerd, it's not quite going to topple Shaun and Hot Fuzz just because I'm the sort of person who likes that sort of genre-bending, meta-commentary humour that we were talking about earlier. But this is definitely a very, very good film. It's not as slightly shonky as The World's End or... what was it called?
Scott Pilgrim.
Scott Pilgrim. I'm the comics fan, I should know that. But so yeah, it's a strong film.
We'll have to wait and see, for me, where it sits in the hierarchy. I love Shaun the Dead and Hot Fuzz, especially Shaun the Dead. It's one of my favourite films. It's very, very good. It's shot not far from where I live. But, I don't know, this film really impressed me, and I really like it. Given time, it might creep up there. We'll have to wait and see how I feel about it. But yeah, this has got a strong potential to make it into my top 5 films of the year. Again, check back at Christmas or whenever we do the summary to see if it stays that way. But it's definitely been one of the films I've enjoyed the most in the cinema so far. Next, we'll be reviewing the 10th series of Doctor Who. This is a momentous series, as it's probably the last outing of Peter Capaldi as the Doctor, the last outing of Stephen Moffat as showrunner, and the first and last outing of Pearl Mackie as companion Bill. We've had a chance to watch all the episodes of Series 10 so far. We have quite a lot to say, so let's skip to the chase. And so, Nick, thoughts on the whole series?
Okay, I'll refrain from going straight in and spoiling the finale for at least a few minutes. But yeah, the whole series, pretty good, I think. I'm slightly wavering on it before we watched the finale two-parter, in that it really had been about 50-50 really good episodes and slightly forgettable ones. But I really, really liked the last two-parter. I think it's one of the best sort of finale bits Doctor Who's done for quite a few years, possibly since the first Stephen Moffat series with Matt Smith. So that did very much tip this into okay. There are a few episodes which I think are a bit insert shrug of shoulders here, but the series as a whole, I'm going to go ahead and say was mostly a positive experience for me. I really liked the Capaldi-Mackie chemistry, and Matt Lucas as Nardole as well, who, although he didn't get a massively heartbreaking emotional arc, did get a nice little storyline, and obviously because Matt Lucas is nothing but good at comic timing, did get quite a few good lines. But yeah, overall I'm pretty positive about this. I think my liking of the characters mostly pulled me through, even though there is a 3-part storyline in the middle of the series about monks, in which evil monks arrive to take over the world, and yeah, I don't want to get too bogged down, but that's the main bit I didn't really like, because I didn't think the monks were particularly interesting villains to carry 3 episodes. And also, if you're going to do 3 episodes, ending it on what was basically the power of love. I know we've had to some degree, ever since the series came back, accept the arrival of the power of love in Doctor Who episodes, but I didn't think they quite pulled this particular one off. You know, I'm happy to let them get away with it most Christmas specials, but outside of a Christmas special, you need to do a slightly better job. But yeah, outside of the monks 3-parter and a couple of other slightly episodes, I think it's just about had more good than bad in it, this series.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. This series I thought was good overall. I don't think it was as good as Series 9, which I thought was very strong. Could be one of the best series they've done since they brought Doctor Who back in 2005. But this series was, on the whole, good. The quality was maybe a bit patchier than Series 9, which is why I didn't enjoy it as much. There were a few kind of forgettable, boring episodes. There was no really bad ones. As you say, the monks had sort of diminishing returns each time they were used, and they were used 3 times in a row. It did get a bit thin. Again, like the first monk story, kind of goodish. Second one, okay. Third one for me, okay, this is a bit much.
But the third one started off with the premise of, as I guess you've got to in a 3-parter if you keep raising the stakes, the monks had won and they'd taken over the world. And yeah, there was a nice bit at the beginning of that episode where they were doing like the full-on apocalypse thing, and Bill as sort of the ground-down underdog citizen, and I actually quite liked that. I thought they were doing quite a good job of that, and there was a scene where she found the Doctor, and Peter Capaldi delivered this absolutely amazing speech. I mean, in even a weak episode of recent Doctor Who, Peter Capaldi will normally deliver at least one absolutely amazing speech, in which he talks about how the monks are right and he's come around to their way of thinking. And that was fantastic, to be fair. If the whole of the monk episode had been on the level of the first, 10-12 minutes, then I would probably be singing a slightly different song about it. But instead, there was just this beat where the Doctor reaches the peak of this "I'm evil now" speech. And then Bill shoots him, because why not? And then the whole thing cracks, and it turns out it was just a joke, or just a trick to see if she was really still good. And after that, all the air sort of went out of the episode, and it just sort of toddled along to the end. So yeah, that was, I think, pretty much the moment where me and the monks 3-parter really did part ways. That and the fact that the monks themselves just didn't really have much to them to carry 3 episodes.
I mean, there was quite an interesting first of the 3 episodes from the monks. I don't know how much we want to go into spoilers for individual episodes.
I think we're still, I don't know. I mean, I have just spoiled most of the monks 3-parter. Shall we just say spoilers? Probably liberally. If you haven't seen the last series 10 of Doctor Who, run for your life.
Yeah, spoilers from now on. So yeah, the first of the monk 3-parter had a quite good twist that it all was in this kind of virtual world, and was just a simulation. That was, again, that was quite a good twist at the end. And then the second of the 3-parter had, this kind of moral dilemma at its core, which was quite interesting, about people sort of trying to bargain for their lives with the fate of the world, hands in the balance. And ultimately, Bill trading the fate of the world in order to save the Doctor against the Doctor's wishes, which was, quite a good moment. We thought it was quite a sort of a long walk to that moment, but it was quite a good moment. And there were some good bits scattered throughout the Monk three-parter, but it failed to really come together in the final episode, like you say, which after it's a kind of quite strong opening, the air went out of it a bit.
Yeah, the whole turning out to be a simulation thing, on the one hand, I'm quite a hard audience for that kind of plot twist for whatever reason. Maybe I'm just awful. But yeah, the whole it was a dream, it never really happened. I always roll my eyes slightly at that. I think it was an okay rendition of it, but I just personally always find it a bit annoying. Anyway, considering that was the one bit we all didn't like, I guess we probably shouldn't get bogged down in Monks for like half an hour.
And I thought there were like goodish ones towards the beginning of the series and some more slightly forgettable ones later in the series, before the finale. So the second episode, the Colony one with the smiling robots, was quite good. The Victorian one about the frozen Thames was quite good. Yeah, the housing one, Bill faces the housing crisis in Evil House, I really liked.
There were 5 episodes pre-Monk, and I think I pretty much really liked all of them. I think the oxygen one in the spacesuits was also really good.
Yeah, that was a good episode. Had a very good ending.
Yeah, well, I guess that was the blindness ending, which sort of set up one of the big twists in the Monk three-parter. Again, some nice use of sort of arc plot stuff in this series. The blindness was a bit weird in that, he was blind but not blind, in that they clearly needed to just sort of work around his blindness. For most of the 2 episodes he was blind, just so he would still be blind, and slightly inexplicably hadn't told Bill about it. This was another area which the Monk three-parter felt a bit weird. So at the cliffhanger at the end of episode 2 of the Monk story worked, so fine. But yeah, the spacesuit episode itself, which did the job of blinding him, was very good, as were a lot of the first 4 or 5 episodes.
Yeah, and then post-Monks, I felt, again, some of the more forgettable ones, like there was Victorian Ice Warriors on Mars.
Yeah, it's a shame. I always feel vaguely bad criticising writing by Mark Gatiss, because he seems like a very nice man. But he's written some okay Sherlocks, but his Doctor Who stuff does tend to come down a bit on the side of this is kind of nothingy.
I don't know, they just seem to lack tension, and I wasn't particularly invested in the character or plot for that one. It just really, I think, yeah, as I said, it's kind of forgettable. It's a bit kind of, well, there's the story, now it's over. It did have quite a nice cameo appearance from a classic Doctor Who character, Alpha Centauri, which is a nice bit of kind of squaring off the continuity between the Ice Warriors and that character.
Yeah, I saw people on Twitter saying, there's a classic character comeback in this episode, and I did assume it would be someone so obscure that I wouldn't recognise them, but I wasn't prepared for quite how obscure it was. It was like, then this thing came up, and it's like, based on the shonkiness of that special effect, I'm guessing that must be the old Who character, but God knows what it is.
It's a character from 2 John Pertwee adventures.
Of course it is.
Yeah, there was quite a few early Doctor Who stories involving the Ice Warriors. I think John Pertwee had 1 or 2 clashes with them, and they also involved this other character called Alpha Centauri, who they, again, put in, yes, like I said, to square off the continuity. I mean, that's quite a small thing. I mean, I think that's a reflection of how forgettable that episode is. That literally the most I have to say about it was like a kind of 10-second appearance from a classic Who character right at the very end. Peter
Capaldi does do a lot to sell even some of the more forgettable episodes. He does, give a speech, bring a tear to the eye, deliver a moment. I mean, in his last series, I can't really say enough nice things about Peter Capaldi, particularly once they got past this make him really angry phase they seemed to be going through in Series 8, which had its moments, and it was a take on the Doctor we hadn't really seen in the new series, but I feel like he's coming to his own a bit more in Series 9 and 10, but they've let him be a bit more emotional and all over the place.
Yeah, Capaldi has been great throughout his 3 and a bit series. I could say he's my favourite actor to play the Doctor since they brought it back in 2005. It goes without saying he's a very talented actor. As you say, does a great speech usually once an episode. Especially as time has gone by, they've really appreciated how good Capaldi is and given him more and more meaty bits of acting to do. Yeah, and I think especially when someone else is playing the Doctor, I think we'll look back on the Capaldi years. They'll get better, like a fine wine, they'll get better with time.
At some point in early Series 9, they really recognised Capaldi's ability to sell a massive speech. There's a bit in, risking going way off topic now, but yeah, the Zygon 2-parter in Series 9, where he delivers a massive, searing anti-war speech, which is...
Yeah, that's great.
Single-handedly sells an entire 2-parter. It was fucking amazing. But yes, sadly, even Capaldi couldn't quite save the Mars Ice Warriors episode, although I think I liked the one after that, the Romans one, the Eaters of Light or whatever it was. You sort of implied earlier that it was another slightly forgettable one. I actually quite liked it. It was basically just a better version of the previous one, but I thought it was better enough. I did feel some emotion and feel vaguely invested by it, and everyone involved seemed to be having a bit of fun. There felt like there was a bit more sort of life to it than there was the Martian one. In my opinion, anyway.
It was all right. Again, I don't know. It didn't have much of an impact on me. I've not got much to pull out about it. I thought there were some good bits between Bill and the Doctor in that episode. The whole sort of episode is premised on them having an argument about history that the Doctor settles using the TARDIS. And it was a good opportunity for there to be some good back and forth between Bill and the Doctor. And I guess as we talked about how good Capaldi is, I really like Pearl McKee. She's been really good in this role. It's sad she's only doing one series, and Bill's been a good character, adding some more diversity to the show. First openly LGBT character they've had in the TARDIS as their main companion. I don't know, depending whether or not you count Captain Jack.
Yeah.
And obviously, like a woman of colour, bringing some different perspectives to the characters. And I think the character's been handled well, very sensitively, brought some interesting dynamics to the show. Pearl is a very good actress and really did well with the character. So it's a shame she's only done this one series, because I could have certainly liked to stick around longer. But
on a macro level, I mean, if I could turn back time, much like in the song by Aqua, which I may or may not now edit into the podcast, then I would perhaps have liked it if maybe they'd done this change over a year earlier, when we could have had 2 years with the Doctor, Bill, maybe also Nardole dynamic, because I think it is a good one, and it would have been nice to get more great episodes out of it. On the other hand, after a run of companions which, to be honest, have skated around the edge of outstaying their welcome a bit, like both Amy and Clara did 2.5 years, and by the end we were somewhat ready for them to go. I'm not averse to them leaving us wanting more for once, TBH. I can live with it. I think it's nice that she went off and we thought, it's a shame she's gone, we liked her, rather than, off you go. Fuck off, go on. It's about time.
I think I'd completely agree with Said that it would have been great if we'd had Bill for Series 9, because then, 2 Clara series, 2 Bill series, that would have been a nice balance.
Yeah, and I guess in our meander through the series, we have now reached a 2-part finale. So, I guess one last spoiler warning, because I definitely want to mention what actually happens in the last 10 minutes of the episode. But I thought this was really good. I think Moffat has slightly struggled with the 2-part finales, like the big sense of the epic in his time. Like, he's done a few good setups, like last year, obviously, Heaven Sent, the one where he's alone in a castle, was excellent, like one of the best bits he's done. But the follow-up, Hellbent, the actual finale, end of series, last episode, did possibly get a bit lost in its desire to be massive and sprawling and epic. I thought this one actually did quite a good job of balancing the massive and the small in a way that I really enjoyed. It's as I said earlier, it's probably my favourite Moffat finale since his first one. I think the whole thing came together really well at the end. They had quite a lot of characters to handle, and they kind of all got their moments, as well as having, obviously, the companion that we've mentioned. They also brought back not one, but 2 masters. They had Missy, who's kind of been in and out of this series as it's been ongoing, was in the finale, and also they brought back John Sim to play the Mr. Saxon Master. And it's quite a complicated plot, because everyone's got their kind of sort of thread that runs through it. But I thought it was all handled really well. I mean, the only complaints I could find in me is that it would be nice if the threads dovetailed a bit more. Well, just basically the 2 masters thread, which after the big scene at the beginning of the very last episode did sort of just wander off down its own little track. And although it was quite an entertaining track, and I do think the final scene between the 2 masters was a really excellent scene. It would have been nice if it had dovetailed back into the Cybermen story somehow, because the Cybermen were also in it. And in the first half of this episode, the first part of the 2-parter was actually some of the best Cybermen I think we've seen on Doctor Who ever. Sorry, disclaimer, in the time I've been watching it, which is only the new series. The closest they've done to making the sort of the body horror of it actually work, and it's impressive that in order to do that they've had to go back to the old school design. The Cybermen have had a bit of a bumpy ride since 2005. They haven't had any stellar episodes. I guess they suffered by appearing first in the second series against the Daleks, and the Daleks obviously are basically more popular and more badass. They had one episode, 2-parter where they got to shine, sort of, and it was kind of mediocre, and then just for emphasis, they got completely steamrolled by the Daleks in that finale, literally murdered. And the problem is, for every quite decent Cybermen story they've had, like the James Corden Cybermen in the clothing shop one, which I thought was quite good, there's been some quite bad Cybermen ones, such as the Neil Gaiman authored Cybermen theme park in the future, which was pretty bad. So it's been a rough road for the Cybermen, but this was really good, and they kind of went back and filled in their origin story, which I don't think is actually done in Classic Who. It may have been alluded to, but I don't think it actually filled it in. And they also did quite a good job of explaining how in Classic Who the Cybermen always did look like people wrapped in shell suits in tinfoil with spray-painted bits of metal and cereal boxes glued to their chest. And they always did kind of look like, people in suits. Whereas they did a good job of explaining that by saying, in the early days they were much more organic and had less machine. And over time they became more machine-based, and I thought, that also makes sense. And also there's something really quite disturbing. As you say, getting the body horror down of having lurching, half
human, half machine, really old school Cybermen, sort of wandering around like a sort of mechanical zombie sort of thing. There's some especially when they first appear, and you're not really sure what they are, and they're kind of hooked up to like medical equipment and kind of hunting out people to turn into more Cybermen. It's quite chilling.
Yeah, no, it was some good Cybermen. They got possibly slightly lost in the finale with all the rush to, give the 3 regular characters each their own little send-off, plus the 2 masters. So yeah, the Cybermen were very much the 6th most important element in the finale, and they were mostly there just as a sort of threat. But the episode before that did, I think, do a good job of building up the Cybermen, and I've got no idea what the next showrunner, Chris Chibnall, actually wants to do with the series, but hopefully he'll find some time to build on that and do more sort of scary Cyberman stuff. Or someone will. Some writer will pick them up now.
Yeah, the plot line also of Bill being turned into a Cyberman, which is kind of the big twist at the end of the first half of the 2-part finale. That was really sad. I really felt, really bad for the character, obviously, that there was genuinely powerful emotional impact in that. Considering there was a lot going on, that did cut through the complex storyline to have really kind of, oh, that's awful sort of moment. And it's built up to really well. There's a bit they sort of flash back to when the Doctor and Bill are having a sort of chat on a roof of the university where they both work in the present. And Bill's basically saying, I think going out with Missy in the TARDIS is a bad idea. And the Doctor's like, well, I think we should do it anyway, basically ignoring her. And then she's like, well, at least promise you'll keep me alive. And the Doctor's obviously very much joking, saying, I can't promise I'll keep you alive. Humans, fragile, easily hurt. Then it's done as humorous. But then obviously you could tell the Doctor's those words are playing on his mind. Really realised that oh, he's right. He can't keep people safe, and it is dangerous. And Bill was right. And it's again, Capaldi he's good at doing that sort of realizations subtly and bringing that whole kind of sort of small emotional journey within the overall story together. And that really made me go oh God, this is awful. This is really, really quite powerful. So.
Yeah, there was a review I did read which pointed out that some of the dialogue that they delivered in the Pearl Mackie form must have sounded absolutely ridiculous coming from a Cyberman with no inflections. The bit where she's reminding the Doctor that she only likes girls her own age must have sounded quite weird coming from a robot voice. But yeah.
That was a good line, though. That made me laugh.
It was a very good line. Was it Stephen Moffat trolling people who expected him to deliver a "but I sort of fancy you" line at the last minute? Who knows? But it was funny nonetheless.
It was good. And I've got to take some time to praise our 2 masters. First of all, John Sim. I'm a huge fan of John Sim ever since great shows, like Life on Mars and State of Play. And I thought he was brilliant playing the Master opposite David Tennant. Slightly disappointing that the last time John Sim appeared as the Master was the really, really, really bad The End of Time finale for David Tennant. So I'm quite glad that John Sim's got to come back and do a bit more mastering. And obviously him acting next to Peter Capaldi, especially as when he can be really, really evil and bouncing off Capaldi's kind of more steely, good-natured Doctor. I think that worked really well.
Yeah, it was really good to see him back, especially because obviously his storyline at the end of Series 3 with David Tennant's Doctor was one of those finales that started really well and then possibly went a bit off track in the last episode. I was kind of disappointed that they got through that whole 2, maybe even 3-parter with John Sim hanging around as the Master, and yet he got very few actual scenes to act opposite David Tennant, except the scenes where David Tennant was being represented by some sort of CGI hobbit. So, yeah, I did quite like that they actually just let him be on screen and act with the actors this time. I appreciated that.
I also thought Michelle Gomez as Missy, or the new Master, was really, really good. Again, she does the evil Mary Poppins really, really well. I've certainly thought she was very good in the role, and I kind of like how her plot arc in this story has been a sort of her mellowing and her sort of going from being openly evil into being a good person. And they've done it coming off a drug. She's had to been locked in this vault and had to literally go cold turkey on evil, while the Doctor sort of slowly rehabilitates her, and she's had kind of withdrawal moments and stuff, and it's quite good. And then obviously, as the process of getting clean, part of it is obviously when you run into someone from your previous life, in this case literally your former self, then how do you react to that? Do you fall back into your bad old habits, or do you rise above it? And they do a good job of kind of playing with that dynamic with Missy. Is she good? Is she bad? Is she going to be team up with her evil former self or the good Doctor?
Yeah, I kind of wish she'd made it back to team up with the Doctor before John Sim killed her. That would have been nice.
Yeah, but I guess they wanted to finish both Masters so that the next showrunner can do what he likes with the Master.
I felt like they could have at least given us John Sim regenerating into Michelle Gomez, though. Even if they did want to keep the fate of Michelle Gomez off screen so that the next showrunner, as you say, has a completely blank slate to say, oh, something happened to the Master.
Yeah.
As they always do.
Yeah, so they can do their own Master. Another good point, which what I really liked about Michelle Gomez, and this is a point I'm going to steal from my friend Rachel Eyre, she posted on Twitter, and it is a very good point, which is, it was really good how Missy and the Doctor had this sort of friendship, rather than being direct antagonists. And I think when the Doctor and the Master are sort of friends, as well as sort of frenemies, that's the best Doctor-Master dynamic, which John Pertwee and Roger Delgado had, Roger Delgado was the very first Master. They really nailed that dynamic very well. And as did Anthony Ainley, who was the third actor to play the Master, and Peter Davison, the fifth Doctor. They also had that dynamic.
I think David Tennant used to mention the friendship, but the Master that particular version of the Master is too driven mad with evil to really reciprocate.
So yeah, some good mastering.
Some good mastering. Anyway, the last point I guess I probably have to hit on this is the resolution of the aforementioned Bill storyline when Heather from the pilot returns in all her watery glory.
I really like that. I thought there was a great send-off to the character. The thing with the companions, it's a difficult... When they end, I think they're very, very reluctant to kill off companions, because I think only one proper companion has ever died in Doctor Who, so I think they'd be going a bit too dark. But you can't just drop the companion back where the Doctor met them, because the whole point of their life's been changed by their experience. So where do you leave them is always the big question, and it's been resolved with various companions to sometimes greater or lesser degrees.
Yeah, it has been, possibly the most divisive part. Basically, does it feel like a cheat? And it did and it didn't for me. On the one hand, I think they could have, if Heather was coming back to save Bill, they could possibly have somehow set it up better in this. I guess having to drop hints about Heather would probably have made a somewhat full episode seem even fuller. And I did quite like the pleasant subtlety of the tears thing. We said back when we covered episode 1 that some of the way that Moffat was setting up season 10 felt a bit Russell T Davies, and this felt very Russell T Davies. This was based on a couple of small hints, and the reason it works... It sometimes works when Russell T Davies did it, and the reason I think it works here is because he's invoked a certain level of, look, they just deserve it. It's magic, we don't need to explain it. I don't need to ruin it by going into at great length the incredibly complex sci-fi explanation. It works because the emotion is there and you feel like the character has earned it. It helps that I never felt like Bill was actually dead, because unlike Clara, they hadn't actually taken her off screen for a few episodes. She was there, and as long as she's there, because... as the Doctor sort of said, where there's tears, there's hope. The fact that the character was still hanging around did make me think, okay, you're probably going to be saved somehow. So it didn't massively surprise me when she was, but it did surprise me how they did it, and it invoked the level of sort of subtle sci-fi fantasy magic. Yeah, as I say, the way Moffat has sometimes struggled with, but I thought actually nailed here for once. But obviously, it's somewhat subjective. Your mileage may vary, etc.
I thought it was a very good ending. I agree with everything you had to say. Sometimes I find with Doctor Who, they do have a problem of, by raising the stakes over and over, they kind of paint themselves into a corner, and then, like you say, Deus Ex Machina their way out of the corner. I kind of felt like the ending of Series 3 was a bit like that, and the ending of Series 4, actually, to be honest. Yeah, they raised the stakes with the Bill character by having the Doctor sort of get separated from her, and then her being turned into a Cyberman, and then the Doctor saying that he can't undo it, he can't turn her back into a human. And I was like, how are they going to resolve this? And then obviously they have a creature that seems to be made out of pure thought, or some form of transcendent space creature, obviously comes to free the essence of Bill from her physical being, which I thought was a good resolution to the character. When that other character came back, that they'd had her and Bill had a kind of connection, and then circumstances, such as this person becoming a transcendent space being, had come between them. They kind of actually ended up together. It was, pulled at the heartstrings. I felt a little tear in the corner of my eye when I thought, Bill does get a happy ending with, the pilot. I really thought that was a nice way to wrap it all up. I'm very pleased with how Bill's character was left. Yeah, great one series character, Bill. Really enjoyed having her along.
Yeah, I think, as we sort of said towards the beginning, hopefully, and as has turned out to happen, I think only having one series to do a sort of beginning, middle, end storyline, rather than attempting some 3-year monolith, has suited Stephen Moffat pretty well. I think this has been, as a series arc, pretty decent.
Yeah, I would say this series I felt has been less ambitious than some of his previous series, and probably all the better for it, because it's just been, rather than going with something massive, it's done a sort of quite self-contained story, competently and well, and wrapped it up very nicely.
Yep, bravo. And yeah, we'll see how good Chris Chibnall is, and whether we all find ourselves wishing we'd had more Stephen Moffat. I don't know, after 6 years, it's probably time to give someone else a go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is nice for him to remind us why he likes him before he heads off. Okay, and next we'll be talking about the first storyline of Curse Words, the new sort of modern-day fantasy series from Image Comics, written by Charles Soule and drawn by Ryan Brown. We covered this a few episodes ago, just the first 2 issues, and it's now completed its first storyline. I believe the collection will be coming out in the next week or 2, and this is the first 5 issues of the series, chronicling the adventures of the wizard Wizord, obviously, who comes to our world from a strange fantasy land, at first to destroy it, only to discover that actually he quite likes it, and people here enjoy a level of freedom that he finds appealing. So he decides to try and make a life here, at least partially by selling magical services, and then he quickly discovers that the people back home in his fantasy lands won't let him go that easily. So we've read the first complete story of this ongoing series. Alistair, what did you think?
Yeah, I liked it. It's got an interesting plot to it. Wizard trying to defend himself from the various sort of magical creatures that are coming to get him. At the end of issue 2, which we reviewed earlier, the big twist is that he loses his powers, he loses his magic, and thus obviously it means he's now just a regular guy being hunted by these other very powerful wizards. And they go through a plot arc of him finding his magic by kind of finding the magic in our world. And I thought that was quite an interesting plot line. It was a good way of kind of showing how Wizard discovers more about our world because it's so strange and unusual to him. And he goes to casinos and finds out about Lady Luck, and goes to the cinema and finds out about the magic of Hollywood. I know it seems like a theme that seems to come up a bit recently. I guess it's heavily touched on in American Gods. This kind of idea that if you believe in something, that gives it power, and that power in these stories is literally magic. Terry Pratchett has a similar thing in Small Gods. Other people have used, probably Doctor Who, like I said, has used at various points the power of belief as magic. So again, it's a familiar fantasy touch point, but it's done well here.
Well, yeah, because the first 2 issues, which I did really like, but they did operate on quite a sort of heightened scale of there's this guy, he has these powers, and he does these amazing things. And the only limit seems to be that he has to acquire sapphires, which is sort of a limit, but not really, because at any point he'll just do another trick and get someone else to give him some sapphires. So yeah, making him a bit more vulnerable and giving him a limit, and a limit that makes him, look at what magic is in the real world is, it's a fun way to sort of develop it. And then he wanders around wearing this ridiculous fake beard, which is just funny. Yeah. In fact, the general sort of zippy tone of it is the main thing that's sort of enjoyable about it, the sort of constant little jokes and the sort of slightly cartoony art.
It doesn't take itself hugely seriously, which is good. In that kind of, it's got its tongue firmly in cheek, but the story is still serious, and there's still a sense of dramatic peril. There's a good bit when Wizard first regains his powers after he loses them, and he's basically getting ready to fight the next kind of villain that comes to him, and then he sees there's a tsunami heading for California, and he has to break off what he's doing and use all his powers. His newly gained powers is to use them all up to save people from the tsunami, and that's quite a nice dramatic twist. And then has to find magic again, because that's when the villain comes at him.
Yeah, there's something deeply odd about the fantasy world Wizard apparently comes from. I don't know, I'm sort of assuming there's some sort of reveal coming about that, because there's something really weird about it. It's a really hard world to take seriously, it seems very sort of heightened, especially as they've made more and more effort to make the version of our world that Wizard exists in seem vaguely plausible, if still quite silly. It does vaguely seem like actual people are there doing actual people things, even if Wizard is ridiculous. And the Eiffel Tower coming to life is ridiculous, although quite funny. Yeah,
that is very funny. They bring to life the scale model of the Eiffel Tower they have in Las Vegas. Yeah, and then it runs off to live its own life.
But yeah, I don't know. It feels like there's a reveal coming, or some sort of, I don't know, whether it's going to be a big meta twist, but it's some sort of fiction-based construct or a fantasy world made flesh or something. In which case, I don't know what that says about Wizard. But yeah, it's been fun. It's a good sort of first storyline. The danger with these sort of ongoing series is the first storyline ends up seeming basically like you've bought the first 5 episodes and basically had what boils down to sort of an extended pilot. But I think they did do a good job of making, each issue, especially towards the beginning. Towards the end, they did sort of blur into this sort of long action bit. But yeah, the first few issues I did sort of stand on their own and slowly deepen the concept a bit. I didn't feel like by the 3rd issue I was still in the first one, if that makes sense.
That was quite a nice sort of self-contained storyline that now there's some more characters for Wizard to interact with.
Well, yeah, I guess that's what you want from your ongoing story. Yeah, the story has resolved in a way that sets up more stories going forward.
The other thing I really liked about this comic is there is an element of the actions of Wizard have kind of impact, and there's like consequences to his decisions. There's like, for example, like loads of Michael Bay films are very much kind of, for some reason, there's like no consequence. Like you can smash a city block and like no one ever seems to notice or really care about the consequence of these like enormous meta natural events. And now I think with pop culture, we're getting to a point when we're kind of thinking, people really would react to these big earth-shaking events. They wouldn't just be glossed over, and you can see that in like the Marvel shared universe, how they kind of go back to the impact of the fact that they basically destroyed New York in the Avengers Assembled. And in this, they have an element of that, in that there's a great bit, I think, in the 3rd or 4th issue, because in one of the early issues, Wizard accidentally like disappears an entire football stadium full of people.
He doesn't accidentally do it, he does it on purpose.
He does it on purpose. And then, now there's like police and Interpol and like the mayor of New York are showing up at his office basically asking like reasonable questions like, what happened to these people? Can you bring them back? Are they dead? Are they okay? Where are they? And then he's got to deal with the kind of the consequences of that. And there also seems to be some other effect that when he gains magic from people, like when he gets the magic from the magician seems to lose his memory or lose something. So there's an impact to what he's doing.
Well, yeah, it's another way in which our world seems a bit more sort of weighty and less sort of wafty than the other one does. When we read the first 2 issues, there was played as sort of a nice broad concept, but it didn't really hold up if you thought about it that hard. Like, yes, he's successfully got rid of everyone who was in the stadium and everyone who was watching the stadium, but he hasn't wiped the minds of everyone that this stadium ever existed, so... Yeah.
I like stories that show, like, again, that there are wider consequences to the actions of the characters. Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that they pushed out that I'd like them to come back to in future issues, and they could be good to develop, such as like Interpol and the FBI and the mayor investigating what the actual consequences of Wizard's actions are.
Yeah, and the villain, what is it, Syzygy?
Yeah, I'm not sure how you pronounce that.
I don't even know if you're meant to be able to pronounce it. Again, of the fact that it's just an evil black mass. I don't know, is the villain going to be an evil black mass going forward, or is it going to become a sort of a more human form? It's weird, and
yeah, it kind of reminds me a bit of he looks at least a bit like the villain from Doctor Strange.
Oh, the Dread Dormammu.
Yeah, they kind of, in the sense that they're kind of big kind of cosmic beings that seem to be made out of light and energy.
I guess he's a bit of a Doctor Strange-esque character, or at least it's a Doctor Strange-esque world, the world of curse words, this sort of fantasy world based on magic and waving staffs at things and saying magical words like Shazoom. I do like the art, which I think does a lot to sell both the silliness and the realness in quite a good sort of balanced way. It possibly lost some of its sort of appealing crispness and became a bit rough around the edges in the last couple of issues, which is a shame. Deadlines, who knows. But it is really, really nice art still.
Yeah, I think it's very beautiful to look at. And yeah, the magic is kind of really interestingly drawn, and the fight scenes are really, really well done, so that there's a real kind of page turner, kind of like really get sucked into the fight scenes.
Yeah, it does a good job of sort of squaring off the 2 worlds of it. Yeah, as I keep saying, the real world and the weird magical land. I don't know, it's one of these comics which is a bit elevator pitch, in that, there's a concept, and it is just sort of poking at around the edges of that concept, which can sometimes be a bit sort of, okay, I've read the first storyline and I've seen it all. But I think there's enough sort of depth into that here and enough sort of character stuff. Like the reveal about Wizard's assistant Margaret, which I guess I shouldn't spoil in this podcast, but there is a reveal about that character.
Yeah, that was a good twist.
Somewhere during the course of this storyline. You can find out where for yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, that sort of thing does make you feel, okay, there's some stuff coming in the future. This is something that probably has at least a good 4 or 5 years in it. A good 30 or 40 or 50 issues. You can probably get out of the ongoing soap of it. I mean, I sort of do hope that there's some sort of broader shift coming. It does feel like it could get into a bit of a recurring pattern of evil Syzygy sends someone to kill Wizard kills them instead. But I don't know, it feels like there's thoughts going into this, so I have faith that it probably won't come down to something quite that simple.
Yeah, there's got to be some kind of twist or some kind of broader... And they've had a few twists along the way, so they're clearly not adverse to a twist. So there's got to be some kind of big twist, revelation coming at some point about the nature of the world or the magic. So, I mean, I've got a sense of confidence they're building towards something.
But yeah, no, it's an interesting new comic. It isn't quite, making me cry and challenging my worldview, but it's fun messing around with tropes, genre stuff. I quite like it. Don't you see?
In the last episode, I recommended that Nick listen to You and Me Against the World, the 2005 album from gothy EBM synthpop rockers Apoptygma Berzerk. This is an album that I think is one of the more accessible of the gothy dance music subgenre. It's, a genre that I'm quite into. I like quite a lot of the big bands in that subgenre, such as Apop, other bands like V&V Nation, Covenant. It's a quite niche subculture, but it's a really interesting style of music. I think this is one of the more accessible albums within that subgenre, so it's a good starting point for someone. Anyway, Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, it's good. I was expecting it to be, maybe after you talked it up last time, a bit heavier, actually, a bit more sort of doom, gloom, pounding bass, sort of thudding, oppressive, difficult to live with. I'd need to listen to this alone in a dark room. Sort of more grim, thumping electronica and less sort of slightly catchy and poppy electronica, to be honest. Yeah, this was quite fun. This was quite good, sort of, as I jokingly predicted last time, it was perfectly good gym music or inspiring me through my writing music. Despite the quite gothy picture on the cover and the gothy-ish lyrics, it sort of ticked along quite nicely, really. I've heard pop music that's heavier and more depressing than this.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that it was sort of different to your expectations in that regard, because this is sort of goth music, but it's kind of hard to say specifically what it is that makes it kind of gothy. I mean,
I think it's the pretentious lyrics.
Yeah, and it's also it's an aesthetic. I mean, people have an idea in their head, that's like you say that like goth music's like heavy and miserable, like sort of drone rock and things like that. But what makes it sound gothy is it has definitely the aesthetic that is part of the goth subculture, and they're very much a part of that subculture, and they're influenced by it.
But due to my vigorous level of research, I didn't really have any aesthetics going except for the album cover. I didn't look up anything about them. I have no idea who these people are.
Yeah.
Or what they look like.
Yeah, it's not all, I guess, goth music is heavy on the miserable. Like this stuff, again, it's influenced by like a lot of 80s music like synth pop and things like that, which are a bit sort of more upbeat and stuff. And it's obviously it's designed to be music you can dance to, so it's got that kind of an element of being upbeat in it.
Yeah, I mean, I have in my time liked Genesis, although I've slightly eased back on that in the last few years for some reason. But I do have a Genesis best of, the 3-disc Platinum collection, for anyone who cares, which I have enjoyed in my time. And to be honest, if you turned slightly up the level of noise and slightly up the level of dark pretentiousness in the lyrics, it wouldn't be that far off from a slightly gothier Genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, more gothy and less prog Genesis. I guess Genesis in the poppy Phil Collins era rather than their wanky era.
The Peter Gabriel era.
I like both types of Genesis because I love all camps equally. Yeah. But yeah, it's good. The lyrics, I don't know. So I sometimes get a little bit weary of pretentiousness, so I was a bit on guard when I realised quite how pretentious the lyrics were going. But the music is poppy enough that, to be honest, you can sort of get away with some slightly grim, looking over the edge into darkness lyrics because the music's just so...
Yeah. It's kind of it's a sort of interesting balance. They have very sort of fast beat and energetic music, and then some quite dark themes and stuff. I guess it's kind of it's inspired by Gothic literature and things like that, which is the element that kind of the way that goth culture is inspired by Gothic literature. So, which again deals with these kind of like sort of strong emotions and dark subject matter.
Song titles like "You Keep Me From Breaking Apart" and "Tuning Into the Frequency of Your Soul" and "Mercy Kill." Indeed, it's all quite sort of on the nose. But on the other hand, the music is so poppy that it doesn't annoy me in the way it probably would if the music was incredibly heavy or incredibly slow and they were singing this stuff with a heart-wrenching passion. I may not have got through the album in that case.
Yeah. What were some of your standout songs?
Well, if I had a criticism, it would be that sometimes I struggle to actually tell the difference between some of the songs. But I liked Love to Blame, I liked Cambodia, I liked the first track, although that may just be because I listen to albums in order, because I'm old. It may just be because I heard it a lot. And I quite liked the reprise, I guess, or remix of the last song at the end of Love to Blame at the end of the album. Is Electronic Love to Blame or something.
Yeah, that's good. I like how they did Love to Blame and they bring it back with Is Electric Love to Blame, which kind of shows the two sides of Apop. Some of their music is much more electric and some of it's much more rocky. I think this is one of their rockier albums, which is why I think it's a good intro into sort of EBM and Gothic dance music for people who, I guess, are into kind of rocky bands, because this one is a bit more kind of rock influenced. They did another album called Equalizer, which is much more electronic.
Oh, I like Cambodia as well. That for some reason that really stuck with me. Was that like a single or something, or is that just me?
That's probably one of the standout songs on the album. It could be my favourite. It's actually a cover of a Kim Wilde song.
I did know it sounded familiar, so that doesn't entirely surprise me, but I'm not musically literate enough to actually get that.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me a bit of some of the vaguely gothy punk pop I experimented with as a teenager. It never really became a big genre to me, but I do have at least one Alkaline Trio album and a couple of Bowling for Soup MP3s somewhere in my life. Yeah,
you can hear the influence of punk music in this. I mean, Apop, especially post-punk, like sort of Joy Division and things like that. There's a big influence of their music on on Apop.
But yeah, when I was young, I listened a bit to punk pop, which did sort of Alkaline Trio and Bowling for Soup. As I say, they did sort of seem to have a vaguely gothy aesthetic, given they used to wear a lot of black and have stupid haircuts, but never got quite as pretentious. Or maybe they did. Actually, no, they used to do songs like Girl All the Bad Guys Want, didn't they?
Yeah, that was their song.
That was less pretentious, my emotions, and more, I am a gothy misfit, hear my angst.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big overlap between a lot of these genres that they are. Yeah, they're related in both musical style and their aesthetics as well. Like, yeah, there's a big crossover between punk and goth music, which is one of the reasons why I like both of them.
Yeah, I think my favourite brand of punk is going to continue to be folk punk. But yeah, I do also quite like sort of electronic music as a sort of secondary favourite genre, although it tends to mostly be sort of poppy female vocals at the moment. I've been listening to a lot of Lorde and Grimes, and occasionally Little Boots, so she's a bit more Kylie.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of vintage electronic influences on Apop as well. Like I said, I think they're best described as a sort of synth pop band, and so they're very influenced by Gary Newman and the Human League, people like that, but also EBM bands like Kraftwerk and Front 242, which is in the much more sort of starker electronic music that they make. You can hear the influence of all of that in Apop.
So they're still going, yeah?
Yeah. I saw them on tour a couple of years ago. They're still releasing albums as far as I'm aware.
How many albums are they up to?
I think they've got about 8 or 9 or something at this point. Some of their more recent albums, I think, have been a bit more on, like, say, leaning more towards the kind of the proggier side, with kind of longer songs and kind of like overlapping themes. And they've also, they are become, I think, maybe a bit more like electronica. If you like the electronic side, I'd highly recommend Equalizer, which is like another album that shows a different side of Apop. They also did a really good album called Welcome to Earth. Those are probably my favourites.
Okay, so was this chosen because it was a favourite or because it was a good introduction?
This is one of my favourites as well. I think I do really like this album. I like a lot of their stuff, and like those 3 albums are probably my favourite. this one, Equalizer, and Welcome to Earth. It was hard to decide which one to actually recommend. This one I've played to people before and it's gone down well because, like I say, it's got that kind of catchy poppy thing. It
is a bit of a crowd pleaser. I didn't find this that hard to get into. Some albums I have to listen to quite a few times before I can just sort of put them on in the background and get on with my work. This one was like, this one just went.
Yeah, it's got a broad, like I say, bringing in, they've got covers of like Kim Wilde. There's another song called Shine On that's a cover of The House of Love.
Yeah,
and so there's lots of like good stuff to get into in this album. And it kind of really hangs together well. I think there isn't really like a especially like dull track or anything that's like skippable. It's all very listenable, which is why I think it's a good album.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this. This may well stay on the motivational gym music section of my music collection for at least a while.
When will you be whole again? We've both been down that road, going nowhere. Still you ask, is love to blame?
Well, I'm glad you found that interesting and good to listen to. So, what are you going to recommend to me for the next issue?
Well, we're going straight into another comic, and after recommending you a few of my actual teenage favourites, we're going to take the pressure off now and go back to something a bit more recent, something that I think might be reasonably up your alley, but I'll be interested to see what you think of it. This is actually a bit of a small tie-in, if you like, because I recently did a guest appearance on Radio Free Fandom, a podcast presented by Claire Russo, who's been on our show a couple of times, talking mostly about Harry Potter, and so I reciprocated by going on Radio Free Fandom and talking, surprisingly enough, about comics. Well, comics and also the band R.E.M. So anyway, yes, you can get my appearance on Radio Free Fandom by searching Radio Free Fandom on the internet. You can hear me and Claire talk about R.E.M. and the comics that were nominated for the Hugo Awards this year. And as well as those comics, I also talked briefly about a comic that I feel should have been nominated for the Hugos, especially because it does very much fit in with the Hugos is sort of a general sci-fi fantasy prize, which goes quite heavily on the imagery of like rockets and space and robots and stuff. And so a comic that I feel they really should have nominated by now because it's new and good and about rockets and space and stuff, as I groused on Radio Free Fandom, is Descender. So because aside from all that, I also think it might be up Alistair's alley and it is good and I like it, I am going to recommend Descender Volume 1 Tin Stars from Image, written by Jeff Lemire and drawn by Dustin Nguyen.
Excellent. Well, that sounds really interesting. I can't wait to read it.
Yes, and again, check out my guest appearance on Radio Free Fandom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you enjoyed our podcast, then please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to back episodes of the show, bonus audio clips, and the occasional written piece.
And we actually did post a bonus audio clip from the last episode from where our Orange is the New Black coverage ran long, so there's a chance to actually pop along and listen to some. Or you could also follow us on Twitter as @MFV Podcast, or indeed on Facebook as just Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we talk occasionally about the podcast and sometimes retweet our own accounts whenever we have important pop cultural opinions to share. Okay, I think that's it. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on Twitter as @NickMB, or on my website at nickbryan.com, where there may or may not be some actual new material soon. And, as I said before, you can also hear me on Claire Rousseau's Radio Free Fandom podcast by searching for those words on iTunes and other pod places.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Thanks for listening. Next time, we'll be reviewing Spider-Man Homecoming.
Woo!
Yep, finally we get to talk about some Spider-Man films, which I know Nick is very excited about. As am I.
Oh, yeah.
Another thing I'm also very excited about is Game of Thrones. It's back, and this time it really is winter, so that should be good fun. We're also going to dive into Preacher Series 2. They're on the road now.
Hopefully slightly more eventful than last season, but
Yep.
we'll get to that.
Yeah, but that should be interesting. And then we'll be finding out what I thought of Descender, Volume 1, which I'm quite excited to read. So tune in next time, should be a good episode. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Check back in with us to see what we thought of the Christmas special and what we think of Chris Chibnall and whoever he or she... No, sorry. I got that completely the wrong way around, didn't I? So,
Chris
Yeah.
Chibnall, he or she.
well, you never know. Wachowski brothers, now the Wachowski sisters.
We do know. We do in fact know.
Yes, everyone knows that.